Hello, it's Debs here, Debs DeVries, and I am so happy that you have chosen to be part of this Debt, Doubt and Shame Masterclass. My role is to support midlife women through their big transitions, and it's very notable that midlife often creates problems, tensions, challenges that also impact negatively women's earning or income ability. That's not just me saying so, though I've seen it time and time again. 1 in 10 women leave their roles in the UK or move to part-time work. Very often about that time, relationships come under pressure. There are external and internal issues that often leave midlife women. I'm just going to put you on mute, Jules, because we're recording. And it's very often at midlife that women's earning potential drops quite considerably. For example, 25% of women have at least considered giving up their roles. That's a high number, and 1 in 10 do leave, you could say, stable incomes, because their menopausal challenges often make them feel that they can't do the job, or there are instances where they're not encouraged to have adaptations to do the job. So that's a kind of very pragmatic, bit of a bleak view. But also at midlife, many women often feel called to make the change. I mean, the menopause is the change, isn't it? And want to transition from perhaps one way of making money to another. And again, they can be very unsupported in this. I've seen this time and time again. And one of the roles that I play is helping women to create a business that's on a solid financial footing. In the years that I've been doing this work, one of the things I've noticed is how decisions are made. They are made differently, I tend to see, gender-wise, but I don't want to bring that in. What I want to talk about is how very often women, I perceive anyway, and the evidence is, get quite close to making a decision that would actually take them forward, but very often feel at the last moment that they can't do it. There's some constraint, there's something going on that stops them moving forward strongly in their life. And the more I've examined this, the more that I've seen that it's very often women who are also finding, again, relationship to finance difficult. And it's not just women, of course, but earning power does tend to get capped for many at midlife. Last year, according to the money charity, oh, Gail's here, let's just let Gail in. According to the English money charity, credit card spending went up by 27.9%. It's billions. Gail, I'm just going to mute you, love, so that you don't have to be heard on the recording. So, of course, that's not just midlife women, but the indications are strong and getting stronger that credit card debt is on the increase. And all of us will know more than enough about credit card debt to understand that the rates of interest that are charged can mean that even a relatively modest amount of borrowing can take years and years to pay off. And this has an energetic impact on a person. Just knowing that you're carrying debt is a little bit of your future that's already been hocked, right? You've bought something now and you're going to pay for it in the future. So energetically, that's not really a good place to make decisions from either. But I want to sort of dig in and untangle the roots of this, because it's not as straightforward as it looks. Most people, when challenged over money, will say the same as they will about time. And here we are in the Saturn Venus moment. I don't have enough time and I don't have enough money. And if we ignore the practical outpicturing of that, both of these statements are statements of not enoughness, lack. When did that start? When did that start? I want to just dig in. I'm going to share my screen with you a moment and show you some slides I've put together. And this is a very spirit-led thing. I didn't set out at the beginning of last year when it was to do this. There wasn't some strategy. It was towards the middle of last year that I got a prod and I started putting pieces together and pulling in references. I haven't done a big academic job on this. If you want the references, you'll find them all over the internet. There's been a lot of work done. I just wanted to bring them together so that we can look at it from an energetic perspective, because I know that the women watching this, by and large, are going to understand that energy precedes the physical manifestation of something. So until we start to look underneath what we're saying, we're never going to get close to how to move that energy into a different format, right? So as soon as I hear, well, I can't afford it, I know that somebody's already stuck in this vibration. I'm going to show you what it is in a moment. So lovely to see you, by the way. You're all on mute, so nothing you say, we might have a... So let's just hop forward on this. So according to Gershon Kaufman, who's a lovely Californian psychologist, psychotherapist, he says shame is the most disturbing experience individuals ever have about themselves. No other emotion feels more deeply disturbing because in the moment of shame, the self feels wounded from within. And I'm going to come on to differentiate shame and guilt and explain a little bit more about that. So it's so disturbing, in fact, that we don't know we're feeling it most of the time. And I'm going to explain my view of that anyway. One of my coaches is called Rex Crane. He's a huge personality. He was a big time basketball player. He kind of swapped from basketball to sort of biblical Southern style God when he was 35. And I love him. I mean, he doesn't speak exactly my spiritual language, but he says you can change your future when you disrupt your present. And I just want to let that soak in for a moment, because until we're willing to disrupt our present, well, we can say for sure we're not going to get a different result, are we? And disruption is the name of the game at the moment, because according to me anyway, human potential is trapped and stifled by shame, doubt, and debt. And that's to the detriment of the individual, the collective, and your precious soul, which came here. Your soul doesn't have shame embedded in it, to have a very particular set of experiences. We're trapped when we live by underlying invisible commitments, and this is important. This is in the literature. We consciously or unconsciously are loyal to. Now, in my own case, I first noticed this after my father died. My mother had died 10 years previously. I was at the time 30. And my stepmother went through a bit of a legal shenanigans and hid the will, or one of those stories, right? It happened. And I just sat around going, well, I don't want to upset anybody because my parents wouldn't like that. You know, it wasn't even strictly true. My mother would have been furious. But this loyalty I had to the way my parents expected me to just be nice and polite about everything has suffocated and stifled me at times when really I should have been standing up and fighting my corner. So I'm sure for everybody that watches this, when you suddenly realize you're being loyal to something that you didn't actually create, that is a disruptive moment. It was for me. I didn't have it in the moment. It was weeks later. I thought, why am I saying this? It's crazy. This little slide is really to remind us that we have one wild and precious life. And most of you are going to know the poem. I did actually, for some reason, the grasshoppers popped in there, but it's over pretty quickly, guys. That's what we suddenly realize, isn't it? After 45, 50, Saturn seems to be galloping. And it's worth just reflecting for a moment what it's worth to you, what it's worth to the people you love and the people you serve, to really focus back on what your one wild and precious life is all about. And that's what I'm doing this week. And I really feel very strongly drawn at the moment to determine how I spend my time. And time is connected with money. And we'll talk a little bit about that too. But the intimacy with which we can meet these is in itself disruptive to the patterns that have become embedded in us, and in a very real way. And really why I wanted to do this, I think, from my perspective, was to just have this conversation really going. When we talk about not having enough money, something got broken somewhere along the line, because each of us is capable of making a good living. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that. Now, shame is not guilt. And according to the literature, shame is what you normally feel. Of course, I'm not talking about sociopaths, psychopaths, and so on. When you don't act in accordance with your internal values or your personal perceptions of behavior. Now, the ego, and we'll come on to this in the next slide, may mask the feeling of shame with what they call safety strategies. Like I say, it's one of those things on your radar that you just can't quite spot. Shame arises when we believe that we are damaged in some way. I'm unlovable, I'm unkind, I'm inferior, and are incompetent, are in a landscape that innocent, magical, eternal child in us, which is totally worthy and knows it, becomes damaged. And because it's damaged from the inside, it gets hidden by safety strategies very often. So let's put that more succinctly. Guilt arises when we think we've done damage. I did a terrible thing. I ran over the neighbor's cat. That's a terrible thing. However, there's a mechanism by which the brain works differently for shame and guilt, and I'll come on to that. Our behavior with guilt conflicts with conscience or the rules of the society that we see ourselves as being part of. Shame isn't so obvious. So, shame, where does it originate? Interesting enough, the origins of the word back in the 13th century just used to mean blushing, more or less, scema. So it was clear when I looked at that we kind of have an innate sense that we're doing something out of line. And certainly if you look at childhood development, toddlers, usually around 15 to 18 months, do exhibit shame responses as well as pride and embarrassment. So there is a part of our nature that knows that when it's done something out of line. However, what's much more prevalent is emotional and social conditioning that tells us we've done something shameful, is actually the pernicious one. Now, we could look at religion, politics, economics, gender. We could look at the innocent child who's just stopped in the garden to pull down her pants and have a pee, or said something embarrassing that she doesn't think is embarrassing in front of adults. Hey, Mum, you didn't make the bed this morning. Hey, Mum, I just ate 5 sausages. Hey, Mum, we haven't got any money, or whatever it is. And very suddenly, somebody in the group who doesn't want that honesty will shame that individual. I mean, we're much more open to those ideas now, shaming and blaming. But if you were shamed over anything, that biochemical moment of shock would be branded, if you like, into your neural networks. You have just been told that something that you innocently said or did has made you unworthy. Because the people that love you most, or that you depend on for your safety, should we say, have just demolished your self-worth, and very probably in public. You might have got your legs slapped at school. I mean, I went to a school where the children weren't allowed to use the lavatories apart from break time. Little girls were made to stand with their wet pants on the radiator. I mean, these are deliberate mechanisms. They're not the natural shame you might feel from stealing your friend's sweets, right? Or thumping your brother. And then your love would come back and you'd recognize that you were off. These are imposed societal ideas of what's shameful. Could we talk about original sin? I don't know where I was with that, but we're told in some belief systems that we are sinful, that we're born sinful. That's a terrible thing to lay on anyone. According to a friend of mine who's a minister, the word sin is a mistranslation of Hebrew meaning mistake. It doesn't carry the weight, does it, of the word sin? It's like, oh, I took a wrong turn there. Sin, on the other hand, goes with the idea of, certainly in the Judeo-Christian religions, of hell, of you're seriously broken, and there's going to be a lot of atonement around this. It is a self-perpetuating spiral, because when there's a trigger event, and that's going to be different depending on the individual, what shames you. I was saying to somebody earlier, I don't know how true it is now, but once upon a time, to show your pleasure after a meal, in the Middle Eastern countries, you'd utter a nice big belch. Not shame, not embarrassed at all. That's the signal for, wow, that was a great meal. You've done really well. Somebody uttering a great big belch, generally speaking in public, in other cultures, that's something to be ashamed of. So it's like morals. You've got to look at the social context. And when we do that, we realize these things are only valued depending on what the society places value on. Whereas as individuals, do we not come to a point with ourselves when we know what we value and what we place value on? And so we also get these conflicts between value, myself, and that's okay with me, to the society telling you you should be ashamed of having that idea or thought. So your shame response, we'll talk about that, will create a behavior. And the behaviors that are generally based on shame, because shame, of course, leads to self-doubt. Oh my God, second guess myself. Should I? Shouldn't I? Where do I? Ooh. Because you've almost got this, let's call it false reading, false feedback from society. And shame and doubt are empirically proven to lead to debt. It starts off in your energy field. We'll look at that towards the end. And then more shame over hiding your behavior, because the innocent, eternal child within you doesn't want to do that. It needs to express. Carrying the shame reinforces the safety strategy behavior. And very often, for women as well, that's just not getting involved. That's not engaging. That's not taking the next step. It can freeze your Mars. I don't mean your Mars bar. I mean your will to act, because your Venus has been shut down. So interesting enough, when you look at the neural science around this, both guilt and shame actually trigger fear responses in your brain. But as we said earlier, guilt is focused on what we did. I ran over the neighbor's cat. I broke the speed limit. So it's focused on actions, external actions. So we have a greater sense of agency. We know how to act to alleviate the guilt, right? And this makes a difference in our brain chemistry and how we act. We say to little ones, shake hands or hug and make up. Go to your neighbor, admit something horrible. Go to your friend, say, I'm sorry I was rude to you the other day. We can create an action externally that brings the guilt into balance, right? However, if we consciously or unconsciously believe that we can't rectify the situation or save face, it's very often true for children, but not exclusively children, who are in scenarios very often when they don't know the rules. They unconsciously do things, and then there's a set of rules that nobody's explained to them. Sometimes happens to people when they go into a new group of people, a new tribe of people. They do something and suddenly there's a rule that wasn't explained to you. So if we believe we can't rectify the situation, it triggers a different fear response in order to protect us. So these stress hormones motivate us to enact what I referred to earlier and what the literature refers to as safety strategies: dominance, aggression, blaming, denying, justifying, and very often submission, plain avoidance, fawning, or freezing. All of these are safety strategies. And as we get into a little bit more depth, we can start to see how to spot them in our lives and in other people's lives, because that's the trick. Because if somebody's, somebody's naturally quite submissive, you might, or I might not think they're hiding something. It's just how they are, right? They've always been like that. It's not a person to push themselves, I wouldn't say push themselves forward, but somebody who's always agreeing or pleasing or is quiet in the group. Yes, we've got extroverts and introverts, but could there also be something when that it's not so much just their behavior, it's how their life is picturing out. Is it actually shaping up the way that they've intended, or actually are they losing out big time on lots and lots of things, and consequently for some building up debt, which is a worry to me because it is now at ridiculous proportions. I think it increased by 27 billion in 1 month alone last year in England. We are not thinking machines, though. We are feeling machines. Again, why we can't think our way out of these things. We've got to feel our way out of them. So Antonio Damasio, lovely professor of all of those things, psychology, philosophy, and neurology. What a great guy. He's, got them all in one basket. The University of SoCal says we cannot make decisions without taking into account our emotions. Great. You'll probably say, yes, Deborah, we know that. But what if you're not taking into account all your emotions? What if you just think you are? What if you've bypassed, some emotions have been so difficult that they've got layered over? They've got the safety strategies have got so encrusted that you don't know you're taking decisions from that frequency. This is where I got very interested in this, because he said in 1994 that emotion and its underlying neural machinery participate in decision making. So in my brackets, so why we do what we do has an underlying subconscious, what I called emotional backbone. Now, very often, and I talk to a lot of people, I'm sure you do, and money comes up in almost every conversation in some way. I'm not going to use the word justifying because I don't think that really covers it. People are so embedded in what's actually been a long-term story of why they can't do something. Yeah, I'm getting some nods there. That they don't know that the genesis of that was that they perhaps were shamed or weren't allowed to do something that was within their power to do, was empowering for them. And they get very caught up, and I see this mostly at midwife, in actually living lives which are pretty much disempowered. And in order to recognize that, it's important to recognize where your decisions are coming from. And I'm going to take you there. So firstly, we know emotion has this executive power, and it actually has an overriding influence in your brain. Again, thoughts are very good at masking this. And although I don't propose to go into it in depth tonight, the solar plexus and the solar plexus chakra translate emotion into language, because emotion doesn't have a language, right? You felt emotion before you could speak. But it does that. If it's not clear of the ego, it will, the way I see it, shunt the emotion through a filter or a set of sieves and then come up with the thoughts that most likely match the safety needs of the situation. And the safety needs could be somebody being dominant or aggressive. I'm not saying it's all about fawning or freezing, but the solar plexus plays a very particular energetic role here. And because, and I don't know if this is anywhere in the literature, but I've seen it psychically, I see the construct of the ego as actually drawing power from the solar. I mean, I've seen it from the solar plexus, which makes sense, doesn't it? Where else would it draw power from? It's not going to draw it from the heart. The power's trying to get up to the heart, but the solar plexus has got this little friend hanging around it. Now, we all need an ego, but if the ego, if things happen very fast, and they do limbically, like in picoseconds, those emotions are flashing and those signals are being turned into thoughts, it becomes You need to have somebody in a position of great safety and trust with you to have them pause long enough to get down and dirty and find out what's really going on underneath it. So the big shift you can help people to make is to find the difference between emotions, which are sensation, and feelings, what I say this sensation means. And it doesn't matter if we're still saying, well, I say this sensation means fear. We are now meta to it, right? We've now taken a step above and said, I can see the difference between sensations. I feel, I feel sick in my stomach. I feel pain in my heart. I just feel horrible. I just feel a horrible feeling. Well, that's a sensation. What does it mean? Oh, it means I shouldn't do this. It means that person hates me. Then we start to make meaning, right? And we know we're meaning making machines. We don't have to make meaning of like that at all. We can just stop and go, oh, it's a sensation, and let it dissipate, and then decide what we want to do. But we have to be sharp to understand what's really going on. So what am I really is, rather than I am what I say I'm feeling, is where I'm trying to get us to go. Who am I really? Well, I think most people watching this would say, well, really, I'm an amazing once in a lifetime event in the whole history of the universe. And yeah, I'm a human, but I'm a little piece of God, the universe, the whole thing, and I'm connected to source energy. So where do I want to make my decisions from? We are told free will is the greatest thing we have. But are we really operating in free will? And when I look at the way the ego is very sneaky and sucks some power out of the solar plexus every time it gets there, yes, it takes a lot of courage, of course, to get above that and make a decision that's based on courage, for example, rather than our idea of lack. So who I am really, and what this I am wants, as opposed to the construct of the ego. Now, I know some here have demonstrated huge courage in their life, have said, yeah, I understand. Everybody's telling me that's the safe path and blah, blah, blah. But who I am really isn't making a decision based on what I'm being told by the outside world, how fast to move, how long to stay in the job, how much pension I should get. But most of us probably still have areas where we're not yet clear where we're making decisions from. So let's have a look and see if I can show you a little bit more. I'm going to show you a little bit more of how that could look. Here is Dr. David, can't remember his name, sorry, Dr. David's emotional vibrational chart. Don't take it as solid science, but it's a tool to help you identify which emotions produce what we might call higher frequencies and which produce lower. And we're never, I say to people, we're not trying to escape being a human, right? That's pointless. That's going to happen one day. Guys, the gig will be over. What I believe we need to do is understand where we are in the octave, in the range, so that we can make a decision that shifts us to the place we need to be to make the greatest decision to serve our future self and the highest good, right? Because the future self and the highest good are very entwined. Everything from courage downwards, from pride downwards, is not involved with the highest good. If you want to be altruistic about it, is it? It's just not. It's, what have we got? Pride, anger, desire, fear, grief, apathy, guilt, and shame. But as humans, we need to understand where we are in this octave so that we can make a choice. Shame is at the bottom. Many scientists have agreed that shame is the lowest frequency. Very, very difficult. We might even think we're feeling guilty. Or what I notice with a lot of people, they go into apathy. Yeah, doesn't matter. I'm not important. It doesn't matter. It's okay. It's fine. Before they get even into the guilt or the shame. And this is a really important thing, because for me, many years ago, when my guides were teaching me about, they used to show me a harp, And they used to say, if you want to anchor these high frequencies, you've got to be able to find the very lowest one, because it's all part of the same thing. You're not going to anchor these high ones. You're not going to be able to go play up there if you don't recognize what you're doing down here and can hold it in your body without it defining you, without it flipping you out. The ideas that I work with in Tantra are, how much expansion can I create so I can hold all of this and still be meta to it, still make decisions, rather than being pulled away by into desire, fear, grief, apathy. Whilst I might have to go through them, they're not places I'm going to make decisions from. If I want to make a big investment decision, it's got to be from neutrality and, due diligence and all the other things. It's got to be from willingness. If I've got fear or anything else about it, I need to go clean that up. Maybe the fear is helping me, saying, go and check these people are on the FCA register. That's okay. But once I've listened to that little bit, what would my higher future self want me to do? As I say, I'm really just getting how the higher self and the future self are very involved with the collective good of the whole. And here we are, Pluto in Aquarius. What does Aquarius want for us? Collaboration, of course. But in the environments and the tribes, so Moses has been teaching me that we can thrive in. Is anybody thriving in guilt or apathy? So I hope that's been helpful. Let's have a little look. Now, again, this is from the literature. How does it feel? Do I even feel it? Have I a clue? Well, certainly during triggers, we might, if we're sharp, notice physical changes in our body. Eye contact, stance, just getting really confused, checking out, suddenly very busy, very inward focused. When people get fearful, their whole range of vision goes shh. You can hear their speech patterns just talk about one thing, or they're very, very, very minor focused. When people are relaxed and calm, they're able to be quite 360 about things, take in a lot of different information, see different perspectives. Change in breathing patterns is a clue. When people don't breathe below the solar plexus, it's a huge clue, because once the solar plexus is physically moving, remember, it goes concave and convex, it's touching the guts and the heart and keeping them connected. And we could do a workshop on that, couldn't we? I mean, what's that about? Listening to your gut, feeling your heart. Again, this is harder because people don't often listen to their thoughts or always even admit to them, but there are always going to be associated thoughts of unworthiness or hasty action to cover up, to look good, projecting, deflecting, leaving, arguing, resistance, and intellectualization. I mean, the difference between committed action and psychological assessment, I think there's some big wedges coming into society, but of course, in the 60s and 70s, intellectual assessment of everything, was the way to go, wasn't it? Those kind of psychotherapeutic approaches. But really, when we're into intellectualization of things, we're not in our body. We're simply theorizing. It's another form, very often a form of deflection. Again, in the literature, in all kinds of places, unprocessed shame is shown to lead to anxiety, depression, and other behaviors that are self-destructive. And they include substance dependency, overspending, defensiveness, exhaustion, worry, and, social withdrawal. And as we've established, feeling shame doesn't mean you've done something wrong. We can express the feeling of shame and get it out. I've just finished a leadership program, which probably was part of the trigger of this, where we did this like really high intensity, big group sharing where it was like there was a communal bucket held. We didn't sort of go one at a time and stand up and, so I'm Debs and I was sick on a train in 1978. I think it was 1976 actually, but we just got it all out together, shared the grubbiest bits of ourselves in a big, noisy, snotty, weepy mass. It's very good. Can't remember anything anybody said. But I did once read a quote that said, if we all sat round in a circle and admitted to our shame, we wouldn't find anything very different going on with anybody else. So it can be processed and it doesn't need to be traumatizing. What was I thinking? So again, we will get that feeling from shame to shame, but however, feeling shame and then programming it, right? Applying meaning to it. And remember, shame is a very, very low frequency. It doesn't actually have a meaning, apart from the fact that we've probably transgressed something very deep within us, which I think is a soul thing. Like your soul knows when you've created an energy that your soul didn't want to. And I don't think that really, for me, has ever had anything to do with what society thinks. It's a soul felt thing. That's why little ones can feel it when they hurt each other or something. But things people think about, I'm unlovable, I'm bad, I'm a failure, I don't deserve happiness, I'm not important, keep quiet, make up the difference, be the peacemaker, I don't deserve wealth, I don't deserve a supportive partner, great job, I'm okay as I am. It's just not me. It's just not me to have energy, money, joy, and fun. Well, you look at an 8-year-old or a 7-year-old, and why have they got energy and it sort of seems to get dissipated and squashed and down? Where's that energy going? Because if you don't look at them as a physical being, if you look at all of us as a column of light, as many centers spinning and humming and drawing massive amounts of energy in from the cosmic grid, the stellar grid. I mean, we started out as a sperm and an egg, right? A trillion cells have come off that one incident. There's got to be somewhere else this energy's not working for us, right? And it's there. So I just want you to play with me for a moment. Have you got a pen handy? I should have asked at the beginning, but do you have? You have? You're a star. It's only a minute, but I just wanted to say that for the next few minutes, let's just agree, whether you agree permanently or not, but let's just play with the idea that your thoughts do create your reality. And you don't really need to go back to the previous slide, but write down what is not showing up in your life, even if you don't often admit to it, that you would really love to show up in your life. And I'm not going to ask you to share. I'm not going to ask you to. I just want you to have a moment, frankly, to have a moment of radical self-reflection. And it might be that something is showing up that you don't want, even if you don't often admit it. Again, it's not to be shared publicly, but at some point, you created the conditions for this to happen. And that's interesting, isn't it? In itself, how do we create the conditions where this isn't happening, or this is happening and I don't want it to happen? And just let that sit in your subconscious. We don't want to get overly analytical about it. It's just something to mull over in this Venus Saturn moment and beyond, of course, but it's a really good time to be mulling over it now, because we start to look and say, well, if I was making choices, at some point I made choices that led to this. What was underneath the choices that I made? Now I look back. And again, it's not, I know it's not a cliche, it's not right or wrong. It's just beginning to get really sharp and clear on where your choices are coming from. So, beautiful Brené Brown, of course, couldn't do this without her, said, if you put shame in a Petri dish, it needs 3 things to grow exponentially: secrecy, silence, and judgment. And are they not at the heart of so much that shame has been created around? Secrecy, silence, and judgment. Our own silence about where we feel we're falling short, where we've been ashamed, what we've done that we wouldn't want a friend to know about. Well, a true friend would know, right? What's causing us to hang on to these, and they were never any good, but secrecy, silence, and judgment belong to a paradigm that I don't want to see anymore. She says, if you put the same amount of shame in a Petri dish and douse it with empathy, it can't survive. Which is a beautiful way of describing what conditions work to have something thrive, whether it's shame or not. You alone can do it. This is me, but you cannot do it alone. And again, this is a call to the lone wolves who might be out there, that I don't know about you, but we know it's the age of Aquarius, and surely we know that means collaborating. And it can't mean just turning up with bits of us where we haven't. I'm not saying go tell everybody everything, but why not? You might really find out who you're supposed to be with or not. But we have to know ourselves fully as humans to bring not just all of ourselves, which is a bit of a woolly concept, even as I say it, but to be able to sit in groups, sit in environments, sit in tribe, and understand where our decisions are being made from. And to help each other, to guide each other, to have faith, because courage and faith go together, that if you make a decision from a certain frequency, you don't need to belong to a religion or a group or a sect. Just have enough ability to look at the basic physics of it. You're going to get a result that reflects that. If you sow a seed in stony ground, you might get a bit of a sprout. So if you make a decision, or any of us makes a decision based on fear, sooner or later, it will shrivel and die. That decision won't go well for us. It might get us out of a short-term situation, but it hasn't been planted in the heart, where the heart can do the work of expanding that and connecting with the greatest field, and having that decision bear fruit in a particular way. It's not that decisions made elsewhere don't bear fruit, they just bear different fruit, and they are much more connected with the self and the local. I don't mean local as opposed to global, I mean what that person needs in that moment. Whereas when you're making decisions from the heart and above, you're in a very different conversation, a reciprocal conversation with the cosmos in a particular way. Everything we do is reciprocal. You breathe out, a tree breathes in. There isn't anything that doesn't work by reciprocity. It's just that when you step into the heart space and faith, you're probably going to need a bit more patience. Because particularly these days, everybody wants to know now. We overdiagnose, we make things happen very fast, we decide, we're taught, we're pushed, can't make a decision. But where you make that decision from is vital, it's pivotal. Do you want to have a reciprocal agreement with your fear? Or do you want to jump into your heart space and see what making decisions from there does for you? Because the frequency itself will determine what you get back. So thank you, Brené. She's absolutely wonderful. And of course, it doesn't surprise us, does it, to know that self-doubt is triggered by shame. As soon as you feel a moment of shame, even if you've got your brain has already taken you to a safety strategy, you're arguing, you're checking out, you're doing what? Now you're doubting yourself. And that sets off the unconscious need in the autonomic system to hold back, hide, or not even try something because this sense that you're going to fail. You're unworthy anyway. It's not for you. So debt is first created in that way internally, a sense of always having to make it up to the world in some way. It could be rescuing, overhelping, giving too much away. It could be the partner in a relationship that does all the emotional work. It could be anything where there isn't a reciprocity that is actually reflecting some kind of balance that you want. And later it shows up very often physically. I've seen this with women in my own family, and pounds and dollars, because we also use energy in repressing emotion. And then other methods of survival get employed to make up the difference. That can be credit card spending. It can be an unsuitable partner who might just be a real safe place for you. In some people, it can be using alcohol. The list goes on, but it's actually an imbalance within the self. And we're just going to move energetically a little bit. Your chakras need to detox and upgrade regularly. And when I say detox, isn't the old green smoothie thing. If you think of a chakra as a spinning disc, almost like a very, very, very fine crystalline, it's crystalline and it's slightly gaseous spinning disc. They pick up code, right? They're trying to pull through code from the cosmic and stellar systems, light, photons, which is information, which is code. And they're already, they were coded primarily so that we could evolve as a race. Before we could speak, we knew what to do. If somebody hit you on the head, you didn't get intellectual about it. You just hit them back or ran away, right? So chakras have programs. But when we are given other programs that we brand into our neuro pathways, and they then create biochemicals, our DNA reads them as its environment. And that then gets translated back to the chakras, which are in a reciprocal discussion with you, in a way, through your meridians, through all these things. They are picking up what you're giving out. So if your DNA is giving out, these programs where we've got jammed, the chakras will just read that and send it back. Now, in a system that hasn't got that issue going on, the chakras will, every so often, they will upgrade. They will pull through new code, and the DNA will read that new code, and the human being will go through usually a relatively unpleasant process. And they might have a wonderful initiation, like, oh, it's wonderful to go to the group or whatever and get your initiation. But then there's the embodiment, right? So the initiation is the moment you get the new code. The embodiment is what you do with it, because your old code has to be overwritten. And this is also part of overcoming, these pulls of the lower frequencies. We have to be able to go through a bit of a dark night sometimes. Your chakras, in a healthy system, the chakras are just constantly able to have this reciprocal conversation with the stellar codes and helping you to decode and recode. In transference healing, we call it a transference shift. There are animals on the planet that are carrying those codes through the waters and through different things. And just to remind you, the very basic, we've got 108 internal chakras. Chakra system starts at the root, Muladhara, Svadhisthana, and so on. And each of them is already calibrated to contain a certain set of information for us, isn't it? whether we knew it or not when we were babies or children, we would grow into each of these stages. But depending on what we inherited, there will be coding that, if you like, inhibits the purity. I don't mean that in a moral sense, the absoluteness of what these chakras were originally designed to do, our Adam Kadmon body. And overcoming the patterns of the past is, part of that chakratic, I say upgrade, we're trying to return to the absolute perfection of the origins of what those chakras are calibrated to. But these ones down here, Manipura, Svadhisthana, and Muladhara, are the ones that humanity is really working through at the moment, and overcoming the pulls of them so that we start to work from the heart and then the transpersonal chakras is really where the juice is. Hey, it's about getting those lower chakras to reprogram. And we do that in a reciprocal conversation with Mother Earth, and our own inner being and guidance. So I just want to ask you as well, just reflect just for a minute or two. Can you remember being taught to feel shame over something you'd innocently done or said? And can you even recall at that moment what you chose to do differently at that point? You made a promise to yourself. You became loyal to something that will never do again. I will never let that happen again. I will never speak like that. I will never tell my parents that. I will never do that in public. Or I'll pretend I don't think that, or I'll pretend it, whatever. There's a point at which we make a contract with ourselves. And this also impacts the chakras, because when I look at them psychically, it's like taboos are laid on the center of all of them. What we say, what we feel. And were you given any rules in your family about what was acceptable to share, to talk about, or even to show to the outside world? Mm. Tony Robbins is very big on this. I've seen him do some work around it as well. There's a moment at which we clearly make a decision or a promise to ourselves. I can remember a couple. I can remember thinking the word bloody, I'd be about 7 or 8, in relationship to my mother who just chastised me. And I remember thinking, I will never tell her how I'm feeling again. I'm going to be a hard woman. And I remember thinking the word bloody and then kind of looking around, waiting for God to strike me, because I was, first 10 years of my life, I was sent to Methodist church. Well, not the first 10, but and God had a big book and he was busy watching me, and he ticked all the things I did that were right, according to the people who told me, and he put a big black cross for all the things I did wrong. So I remember thinking, bloody woman. I remember thinking, I'm just going to be a hard woman then. Made that decision. 7 or 8. So my loves, just the last bit, I wanted to talk about how it actually is in your physical body. We're going to look at the fascia, the myofascia to begin with, which, as you probably know, is this collagenous-based soft tissue. It's in the body, it's in the cells. And until fairly recently, it was scraped away when they were doing post-mortems. They kind of, ooh, what's that? Not important. Let's have a look at the muscle. People like Tom Myers weren't put off. And he and now others recognize that fascia is really the net which holds everything together. I think it's rather like we've woken up to the fact that the net of the cosmos holds us all together. The energy system that we're in is in fact a grid. And fascia connects everything. And it plays a key role in locking in past experiences and mental patterns into the bodily tissue. Through biochemistry, your body can make about 1,800 biochemicals. So chronic emotional holdings get lodged in the body and in particular in the fascia. Now, this can show up in static postural patterns that might not look at all unusual, but it's there. I had a myofascial release about 15 years ago when my upper half of my body sat up. I did, as the energy was released in it, and started to corkscrew. My therapist was just holding me lightly under my shoulders, and my body was doing, I can't really, it was, and then I was like a dolphin, and I was doing nothing. It was purely released energy. Absolutely amazing. So the patterns get down into the nervous system. They're in the muscles, they're in the chemistry, and therefore they're in the CNS, the central nervous system. Again, when we wind everything back and we look at the action of the solar plexus and the ego, patterns we don't even know why we're saying or doing what we're doing, it's because it's limbic. It happens very fast. And so this network, if you like, is another way that we can start to disrupt patterns simply by, even if we don't think we need it, getting something like, myofascial release, I would say, for a start. Now, sorry, guys, we've skipped on. So shame, I see it as stored in the base chakra, but it resonates elsewhere. That's like the little storehouse. And it can feel like apathy. Sometimes it feels like grief, resistance, excuses, intellectualization, extreme tiredness that's not clinical or medical, checking out, just wanting to sleep. According to lovely Gerald Fishkin, the experience of shame, again, is connected with the limbic system. So again, it happens so fast, the way we suddenly have a thought, oh, I'll be busy that day, before they even ask me, we just have to be present to all the other clues, what's showing up in our life, what's not showing up in our life, the thoughts I'm having, the way I'm sitting, the actions I'm taking, where are they based? I see doubt and debt, they're more embedded in the sacral chakra and actually to a degree to the solar plexus chakra as well. So again, this conversation that the chakras are having is interrupted to a degree if we can't intervene, because it is our job to disrupt these patterns. Who else is going to do it? Even if we trust someone, there'll be places that we won't go. Eventually, unprocessed shame is shown to lead to illness. It's a proven link to anxiety, depression, and substance abuse. That's huge, isn't it? I mean, that is just a phenomenal thought. Unprocessed shame. Wonderful. Part of me wants to go, that's all it is. But because it's such a low frequency and such a painful thing, it's like the body, the mind have set up pathways not to have that happen. So disrupting it is, for me, is like a big part of what I do. Because until we can dig down and actually be honest enough to dig the little critters out, we're still working at levels that won't create profound change. They might create some change, but the possibility of going back into old patterns still exists. And that's something that I've wanted to tackle all my life. A small sample of other clues, and again, this is from the literature, not the Bible of Debs de Vries. Feeling overlooked, disrespected, ignored, and taken advantage of. Feeling that. Speaking too softly, even stuttering. Not sharing thoughts or feelings because you're afraid to look inappropriate or stupid. Here's a funny one, being more worried about failure than doing something immoral. That's in the literature. Because, of course, as we said earlier, morality shifts depending on your tribe, your culture, even the age you were born in. Sometimes doing something immoral could lead to great advances. There you are. Being a perfectionist and wanting to have the last word. Isn't that interesting? I was quite fascinated when I came up with that. Is a sample of other clues that somebody's actually working in the frequency of 200. Shame. Really quickly, and those of you that work with energy will know this. I'm not going to do them all, but to maintain a healthy energetic system, our aura needs to be protected and tidy so that it's not constantly being impacted by other people's energy, which that includes our own thoughts, right? And our own feelings and what we're not processing. In a healthy energetic system, our chakras can draw in energy through the meridian, stellar systems in the earth, detox what we need to, bring in the new codes that we need to. That's what transference does. That's why I love it. But if you have a look around here, I mean, the one I see most for midlife women is all around the womb area. These cords of attachment come through the birth process. I can see clearly how methods of birthing make that much more likely to happen. So people are, the word confused, I'm going to use it in its purest form, confused about where they begin and end and what they're supposed to do and what they can and can't do. And when people become codependent in that way, or perhaps very parent-child, there's a lot of draining going on. So again, the physical body eventually gets depleted, but the energetic body finds it really difficult to raise energy all the way up the Socratic system, so that we're in a place where we're making decisions from the heart and above. Yeah, I mean, can feel scattered or ungrounded, energetic debris, all of them build up. And when I do the monthly detox in the temple, one of the things we use is a ceremony called a circle of fire. You'll see this in Tantra as well, to ensure that these stagnant bits of energy get lifted. And fire is still the most purifying of all the elements, right? Without a doubt. Have to lift these off regularly so that your chakras don't get slowed down and hampered. And eventually that stagnant energy tends to show up as illness in the body, because where there's a flaw in the DNA, it's different family to family. Sure enough, that stagnant energy will coalesce and they'll speak to each other, and that energy will express as something, but probably something we don't want, right? It's still energy expressing, but it's not probably the way we want it. It's coming out as an illness rather than being naturally released. So energetic debt really does start within. So quick review, really. I think the main things I wanted to get across are shame is a very hard to spot vibration. It's intertwined with debt, doubt, depression, and so much more. And I hope that at least 2 or 3 things I've said have kind of popped for you. It's like, we're looking for clues, right? It's very hard to know it's acting out. So we have to look in the mirror of life. Understanding how your actions could be based on shame, wearing the mask of something else, because we are in the process of making the ego, do its work, but not sit on the boss's desk with a big cigar, calling all the shots. It's a first step to coming out of what I call this downward spiral. And that's what I see for so many women in midlife. They can't jump on the elevator, as I call it, that's available through the uprising of the Kundalini and the Chiron transit, because they're stuck in these lower chakras. Yes, of course, they come in and into their heart, but they can't stay in their heart, because when they get into a lower thing, it takes them almost into another world. Where is another world? So we need new methods of intervention to disrupt patterns. Like I say, you alone can do it, but you can't do it alone. Only really looking in the mirror with somebody else can help you to get that energetic and practical support. It's not a one and done issue. Until we have the capabilities of, a very advanced being, I imagine that we're all going to be challenged by being human for a very long time. And what I found particularly powerful really is having other people hold the mirror up for me as well, because I'm very good at ignoring what I can see in it. And these are invisible chains. And that's what I call them. They're invisible chains. And I just feel, don't you, that humanity is breaking those chains. They're DNA, they're historical, and you have to be committed to do it. Without commitment, there can be no great actions afterwards. It's all optional. And 99% isn't enough. 99% isn't enough. We have to be 100% committed. That's when things will move. Support and accountability. We need alchemy so that we're permanently transforming rather than just recycling. The shamanic practice, in terms of burning things off, is very, very important. Healings and energy work, myofascia release. And honestly, I've been a lone wolf, but I've entered into the world of the wolf tribe. I need a supportive network to hold me high, not to judge me, not to blame me, not to tell me I'm not doing well enough, but to remind me who I am at my very highest possibility. So one of the reasons, of course, I wanted to talk to you about this was because I have created an inner sanctum. So I've been teaching work from the Temple of Sheba. Sheba came to me 5 years ago. Honestly, it wasn't pretty. I actually thought I was dying at the time. I was very, very, very unwell. And Sheba came and sat next to me. She's kind of that blue, which is why I chose this. And very dark. That's all I could remember afterwards. And she asked me to create the Temple of Sheba. I've been running teachings out of the Temple of Sheba for 5 years now. And for some people, it's a big jump to enter into mentoring or into a group program financially. Now, given all I've said, but you can't take people from the bottom of the Maslowian pyramid to the very top, generally speaking. One or two brave souls might jump there, but you have to create realms of safety and confidence and expansion. So just really, I've been playing with it in the background for a few weeks, but I've now opened this energetic support community. So it is about shaking off